Both of Thrustmaster's wired Xbox controllers, which happen to be modular with swappable components, are going to get reviewed side by side, but instead of coming as friends, as comrades, much like the 8-bit DOE controllers I reviewed recently, these two gladiators are stepping in the arena with the full intent of shredding through the other to grab the golden crown that is the Gamer Heaven stamp of approval. Over 15 categories, these controllers will go side by side, back and forth, but at the end of the day, the Eswap X and the cheaper and newer Eswap S share a lot of the same core features.
This is your controller captain. We've reached 6,900 feet. Go ahead and start flicking the sticks and mollywopping the back paddles.
You don't like back paddles? How about those rear buttons? We've tested almost 100 custom and premium controllers, and we're only at the beginning. You need a thumbstick guide or a tutorial on how to overclock your controller? Check out the controller playlist.
Bing bong.
Controller captain out.
Bought them as a pair, and they've been sitting in the closet awaiting review patiently. They've been speaking up occasionally, but a lot of projects have been popping up in front of them in queue, and they've just kind of gotten put on the back burner. Luckily, I did stir them. They're not stale or anything. There was kind of like a weird cakey film on the top, but after stirring them, they're still delicious controllers and still definitely worth putting their cakes on the table here today. Worth our attention, worth me talking about, and worth you probably sitting through the video. Learn a little bit about these controllers. They're modular, which is awesome because we live in a world where potentiometer thumbstick modules will develop stick drift inevitably. Whether it's out of the box or it's 4 years down the road, I personally have a very good track record with stick drift, but it is randomized. It's like a terminal disease. Things can accelerate or speed up the problem of stick drift, but it's completely randomized. But if and when stick drift starts bending you over and having its way with you, and you followed along with the video linked in the description below, and you still can't mitigate that stick drift, god dang gosh darn, Thrustmaster has you covered, because unlike the Victrix BFG Pro, which doesn't sell any replacement parts, it is a modular controller, but that's just to customize. Do you want PlayStation symmetrical sticks or Xbox offset sticks? Do you want a fight pad on there for fighting games, for beat 'em ups? But currently PDP does not sell any replacement modules, so if you get stick drift, you're still buying a $180 Pro controller, not a $20 or $40 module. Not the case with Thrustmaster, and they've had a good system in place for years with the X and now with the newer and cheaper S. And while the S isn't quite as customizable as the X, being able to swap thumbstick layouts, it does still have the feature of being able to swap the modules if you get stick drift, which is pretty sick. Now the company Thrustmaster, gosh darn, that is a red ass screen.
With their eyes as red as the devil's dick.
You can even see the red glow on my face right now. I'm staring into Satan's bunghole. Actually, you can see it even more if I turn these lights off. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Thrustmaster is primarily known for their racing sim wheels, I would say. They make incredibly high quality wheels, but they also make very high quality controllers. Little sidebar, it would have been more accurate for me to say they're known for simulation equipment, such as not only racing sims, but also, it's in the name for God's sake, Thrustmaster. They've been making joysticks and flight simulator equipment since like I was a wee lad. Yeah, Thrustmaster makes a lot of gaming peripherals. The XR is definitely a very niche controller, as it is specifically for racing games, because the left thumbstick module is actually a little steering wheel. Why is my internet so slow right now? Must be because it's raining outside. The dewdrops are messing with the radio wave propagation. Controllers, that's where we like to hang out. Holy moly. All I can say with that, jeepers. You have all these optional accessories, these modular components that you can opt for as you get a little extra dough coming in. Maybe you get that little bonus your boss has been dangling in front of your face like a sweet, sweet bent carrot. And finally, you get to suck on that carrot and you'd start buying these little soft touch grips. Got the cockpit of a Boeing 747 down here. Actually, your audio controls for the 3.5mm headphone jack. We'll talk about it later. But I want to take a peek at their showroom floor. Their model lineup is pretty much dominated by the X and S, and this could be a cause of some confusion. There's two models that share pretty much the same name, the Eswap Pro and the Eswap X Pro. Sure enough, the one that has the letter X in it is going to be for Xbox as opposed to PS4. And yes, this version can be played on a PS5, but only for PS4 games. Obviously, when you launch a PS5 game, it'll tell you to fuck off and grab a DualSense controller. But same price, literally same controller, same features, just communication for each platform. And they also have a freakishly cheap budget or entry-level controller called the GPXID Pro. I've had hands-on time with this controller. I will say in the $30 range, there is better controllers such as the PowerA Spectra. As for their modules, if you do develop stick drift, $25. But one interesting note here, I would recommend just popping for one of these trim piece kits, these color pop kits. I'm going to keep calling them that. Color pack, that's what they call them. I'm going to call it a color pop kit. Now, these kits come with two swappable thumbstick modules with different colors, plus a D-pad D-pad and triggers, that's a much better value because you're getting the 2 swappable modules, which are their better sticks. They're called mini sticks, which give you 33% better physical resistance, 66 better recentering precision, and double the lifespan over their original thumbsticks. I don't know about the validity of all those claims, but I do know that I personally would rather spend $55 and get all this stuff rather than just spending $25 for one module. Just to confirm that I'm not cuckoo, I'm not talking out of my buns or anything, down here in box contents, each one of these kits does include 2 interchangeable backlit mini stick modules. I'm going to pivot myself at a 90-degree angle. You're going to flip over here and we're going to talk about the packaging and included accessories, which should be very similar. Packaging on the Eswap S and X is very similar, as their licensed Xbox products are going to have lime green branding and the stamp and sigil from the desk of Phil Spencer. He doesn't do it personally, but you know, they print it on there. Now the Eswap X is going to be a little bit larger of a box because it does have more included accessories, and the box itself does feel a little bit more premium as it does slide out or pull out, and it does have a second soft pull tab over here. If you want to pause the screen to read some of the key features, you may do so now. Now the Eswap S box opens from the top, as where the Eswap X box opens from the front. Instruction manual is almost identical, but a deep dive later. Foam blocks on top, but a plug for the socials on the X. Overall, the packaging looks incredibly premium for the price points of both of these controllers, as they are held in with this nice soft cloth material. Almost feels velvety, like suede or something. Very nice. Oh yes, there's rear buttons on this bad boy. Pulling on this tab gets you easy access to your included USB-C cable, which is 10-foot, braided, relatively lightweight and flexible. There is no permanent Velcro tieback that you're going to hold on to, and I'm not a huge fan of this bulky plastic shroud. A little bit of branding on the USB-A side, no dust covers on the USB-C or A side. That is it for included accessories on the Eswap X. Get out of my face, please. That was disrespectful. I apologize. You're a great controller. You might even win this comparison. Probably not, but you might. And then on the X, you have a separate box for your accessories, which does have cutouts on each side for your fingers, which I do really appreciate. I mentioned on my Victrix BFG Pro review that it was very difficult to get out the included accessories because they were wedged in the laser cut foam. Okay, I'm going to open it from the tuchus. You have a 2-piece tool, unique Thrustmaster joint on this end, and a Phillips or cross tip on this end. A cloth bag to hold your accessories, since there isn't any kind of an included carrying case, which isn't a huge deal. This is a perfect solution for holding all your loose accessories. Now on the X, which is an older controller, they are rocking micro USB. They hadn't made the change or jump to USB-C yet, but I will say this is a very nice connector, as it does have little troughs or cutouts that you need to guide into, and it will snap firmly into place. Same story here, 10-foot, relatively lightweight and flexible, braided. As for the included thumbstick caps, they're different than a lot of other controllers on the market because instead of just being magnetized or held on with friction, they are threaded. The only other controller I can think of that comes to mind is the Elite Series 2, which still has swappable magnetized caps, but the actual stems or shafts of the thumbsticks are threaded and pop off like that. There is a little dust cover to cover this piano black, which I'm not a huge fan of, but what I do like, there is anti-friction rings, so you will glide along smooth plastic when you're at full lock at the outside of the thumbstick gates. I love to see that, because you don't on all Xbox controllers, as opposed to PlayStation, where it's a standard feature even on the stock DualSense controller. But as for these 4 thumbstick cap options, a very interesting story, as this is a Pro controller. However, there really is no high option here. In fact, these are all low to mid-rise sticks. But you do have 2 short domed options, and of course 2 concaved options. Now the rubber or silicone compound that Thrustmaster goes with their thumbsticks is very interesting. It's quite grippy, however if you don't wipe them off, when your hands get oily or greasy, they actually get freakishly slick, so just wipe them off with your shirt. And these aren't so soft and squishy that they're going to start breaking apart prematurely, so I like these. A little ASMR coming at you. It's not like that really secure mechanism in the DualSense Edge where you have those 2 levers that are underneath a plastic trim piece. This has some little contact pads and pogo pins and then some magnets to hold it in place, and that's how you get your modules in and out. Awesome. Now it looks like over time Thrustmaster minimized their paper waste, which I like to see. They went from 6 pieces of documentation down to 4. Out of all these pieces of documentation, what's really going to get you up and running is going to be the quick start guide. I'm going to take my native tongue here, which is English, and get down to business. Now this is decent. I've had worse, but over the years I've certainly had better. Relatively small font, no color, but you do have some small pictures, and it will walk you through things like swapping the modules, remapping the rear buttons. You know what? You don't really need this because you're watching a video, and that's just it is way danker than this. These glossy reflective cards are prompting you to install the software, the application suite to back up the hardware, which of course there is a separate section in the video. Now as for cosmetics or appearance, these controllers are very similar because of their shape or shell design. Some of the cosmetic differences is going to be a coloration difference in the D-pad D-pad and thumbstick bases, you get this really nice metallic sandstone or beige or whatever the hell you want to call this color. Super sweet, and that extends over here to the triggers. As we're on the Eswap S, you're getting black thumbstick bases and silver triggers. Also slightly different pattern on the triggers, different looking palm grips, as the S does not have those swappable modular color pop kits, but you can swap those on the higher end X. This trim piece is gloss or piano black. As we're over here, they extended this etched pattern, and it actually is etched. It does have a little bit of stippling or texture on there. But if I were to catch a glimpse of both of these controllers out of the corner of my eye, out of my peripherals, and just have to judge one instantly to go home with and roll around with, it would be the X. I think it's a cosmetically more pleasing controller. It's a little more sensual because of that Dust Me in the Desert Gray, or whatever the fuck color this is. Also, this module down here, which I will say looks a little bit rambunctious, like there's too much going on just to control a 3.5mm audio jack, but it does make the controller look a little bit cooler. As for weight and dimensions, the tech specs from the manufacturer are popping up on screen for each model. S over here, X over here, maybe vice versa. I might flip her around in post-editing if I'm feeling spicy. I don't even know. But as far as real-world comfort when you wrap the gamer icicles and you're ready to get cold, these controllers are extremely similar in size and shape. In fact, just looking at them, I would say the shell design is almost identical, but there are a couple of differences in comfort. That would be when you're extending all your fingers out to cover those rear buttons. It is more comfortable on the S, which only has 2 rear buttons, as opposed to the X. If you're trying to cover all 4 of them simultaneously, it is a very cramped and stupid position. We'll talk about it later. Now, I will say the X does have potential to be slightly more comfortable because you can get soft touch rubberized aftermarket side panels that pop on from the manufacturer, but if we're just going stock for stock, it's a draw. They're very, very similar. The only notable difference for me is that the X holds a little bit more weight, so if you're holding your controller out like this, you might get a little bit more wrist fatigue, but if you're playing on a computer at a desk, you can just rest your hands on your desk. If you're playing on the couch, I recently reviewed that Exo pillow from Scuff. It's actually pretty sick, and that will give you something to prop your hands up on to counteract the little bit heavier weight of the X over here. Now, as for the D-pad or direction buttons, it is swappable, removable with this module on the X model. However, it is permanently affixed on the S. They are both mechanical 4-way D-pads. I did check for directional inputs to see if there were 8-way micro switches in there, or 8 mechanical switches. It's not. It is 4 distinct steps. You can still get diagonal inputs by pressing both left and up or down and right, but there is no specific micro switch for each diagonal input. Now, I did mention they're both mechanical. The X model does seem a little bit more secure, requires a bit more resistance, and is also slightly quieter. But after going back and forth several times off camera, I do actually prefer the permanently affixed and cheaper Eswap S in the D-pad department. It just feels a little bit smoother, more buttery, faster to actuate, and also the shape of the D-pad feels so nice resting on your thumb. Not that you really just rest your thumb on the D-pad. Usually you're over here walking your character, walking your dog, walking your character. The D-pad's nice as shit on here. So in the D-pad department, the Eswap S fakes an injury and throws a handful of sand at the eyes or corneas of the X. And moving on to the face or action buttons, guess what? Thrustmaster does this absolutely correctly. We're talking about mechanical switches over here. Also, the face buttons are flat, completely flat, which takes some getting used to, but after that initial learning curve, I actually personally prefer over rounded buttons. They're also much more grippy than those stock buttons because instead of that gloss finish, these are matte and they just seem to kind of hold your thumb a little bit better. Best of all, both models do support micro switches, or mechanical switches, I should say. That's a joy. Ooh, yeah, the roll off there. I'm over here like the controller whisperer over here, just tell me your story. And the story that they told matched up. You know, I put them in separate rooms, made sure their stories lined up, and they do. It's the same damn switches in here. It does sound and feel a little bit different, and that is because the shell design is different on the S. It's one piece, it doesn't have those removable side panels, and also it's cheaper plastics. That's, you know, they cut costs quite substantially with this model, so it's gonna be cheaper plastics. And it does sound a little bit more hollow when you hit the buttons, but it's still a joy to use. It was a close call, almost a draw, but in the face or action buttons, the Eswap X pulled a dagger from its boot and shivved in the old gut, the Eswap S. Now, as for the accessory buttons, this was an incredibly hard section for me to grade for a couple of reasons. The newer S includes a share button, which is great for somebody like myself that is constantly capturing gameplay footage for B-roll in my videos. I'm constantly spamming that share button to save gameplay clips, and if you don't have that, you have to press the Xbox button, then a concurrent face button to save a screenshot or clip. It's much more convenient to have that share button, and I prefer the placement of the Xbox home button on the S, but then on the X, I actually prefer the share and option buttons because they're large, actually oversized, and out of the front shell substantially. As we're on the S, they're almost flush. So these controllers are going back and forth, exchanging blows in this segment until the X over here reveals that it's been dueling right-handed when really he's a lefty and does a little switcheroo because it's got this accessory port on the bottom which controls that 3.5mm jack. This extra control would fall into the accessory segment, thus pulling this controller ahead just ever so slightly. Accessory button suite premium X model, not the entry S model. Also, just cosmetically, they also have that sandstone or beige down there and that little trim piece. I like that. Now, as for the thumbsticks or joysticks, both of these controllers are modular and do have replacements online, so if you get stick drift, you can swap them out. That's fantastic. A huge selling feature of both of these controllers. A little bit more of a selling feature on the X. You can swap the D-pad if you want symmetrical PlayStation sticks as opposed to offset Xbox sticks. However, as with almost every modular Xbox controller that allows you to do this, or modular controller period that allows you to go with both thumbstick layouts, the two thumbsticks are closer by about a quarter inch on the swappable version as opposed to a native PlayStation controller, which definitely does come into play because you never really run your two thumbs into each other when you're playing on a PlayStation controller because it's designed to have the two thumbsticks symmetrical or lined up like that. But then when you go to a modular controller like this, it's cool that you have the option bit. Your thumbs can actually bump up against each other, cause a little friction, start a little fire with your hot gameplay because they are closer than typical PlayStation thumbsticks. Rarely hear that mentioned. There you go, you heard it. But the biggest difference here is going to be you do have two additional thumbstick caps with the X model, but really that's just your preference of concaved or dome. There's no height difference there, so you're probably going to want to look to aftermarket thumbstick caps like licensed control freaks, which we'll test right now. Of course, universal slipovers like these ones from Play Vital will work because they're universal, they'll work with just about anything. But here at Gamer Heaven, we're all about the freaks, the control freaks, so we're going to test them right now. Now, if you do have the option to remove the thumbstick caps before putting on control freaks, instead of just pushing on the thumbstick caps, which could speed up the problem with stick drift if you're somebody that's constantly swapping out these control freaks. Licensed Xbox One and Series caps. Too tight for my liking on the domed and the concave model. That's going to be a hard pass for me, and I gouged the shit out of the dome stick. That's okay though. Hazards of the job. That's just cosmetic damage. That's all that is. Xbox caps good on the Eswap S though, which doesn't have swappable caps, so you're always going to have these medium concaves on there. Red Galaxies for PlayStation 4 and 5. Nope, these are for Nintendo Switch. I think I specifically got them in red because that's like Nintendo's theme color, and I thought it would be easy color association. Following along with that, then I should have gotten lime green for Xbox and royal blue for PlayStation. Not a chance. PS4 and 5 caps also too tight. But PS4 and 5 caps loose and wiggly on the S. Switch loose and wiggly. And we already tested the Xbox. We found out that's the winner chicken dinner if you have an Eswap S. But for some reason, the ones on the X seem a little bit wider just by a couple of millimeters, meaning that more of the control freaks do work. But now these controllers have been through the gauntlet. I think they're actually ready to enter the crucible side by side, so they're gonna get plugged up to Project Zero for a little bit of technical analysis on these thumbsticks. Then they can get a proper grade, which I'm sure will be pretty high because they're modular, for God's sake. You get stick drift, pop them out. Over here in a back alley cesspool known as Gamepad Tester, a place I like to spend a lot of my time when I'm not getting tetanus shots. So I've got the Eswap X in hand. We're gonna give the S a turn in just a minute. I will say these thumbsticks are a little bit sloppy toppy. I'm not gonna say out of the box stick drift because that certainly is not the case, but as I rotate the left and right analog sticks on their horizontal and vertical axes, and then I stop. That was a fancy way of saying I move these bitches and then I stop. Axes 0, 1, 2, and 3 are doing their own thing. They're in no kind of communication. They're in no kind of alignment. These potentiometer thumbstick modules are not perfectly calibrated right out of the box, but they're not going to ruin your day with stick drift either, and even if they do, guess what? They're swappable. Bam. That's what happens if you rip out a thumbstick module mid-Gamepad Tester test. As you can see, when you remove one of the modules, it actually deactivates both of the thumbsticks. Very interesting. Pop it back in. Wow, and then she just sputters back to life. Let's test the circularity, which is going to give us our thumbstick accuracy. So if there's any dead zones where you're actually not getting your movements properly registered, which doesn't seem to be the case because this is on par with virtually every other Xbox controller I have tested.
Code 4, we're clear here. Move on to the S.
Now I got the S in hand. She's here to play, but for how long, who knows? Interesting. So... The Swap S wants to jump to 0.0002, which is generally pretty well calibrated potentiometer thumbsticks. That's their resting value. At least that's a common resting value that I see. So a little bit tighter in the dead zone department than the Eswap X, but again, totally randomized because these are potentiometer thumbsticks. They're going to perform the same in gameplay. As for the circularity though, let's go counterclockwise. Yeah, pretty much identical to the Eswap X in performance. The thumbsticks perform admirably in Gamepad Tester, and the fact that they are modular, you can swap them out if you get stick drift, is fantastic. I will say the X pulls ahead of the S just slightly by the fact that you can swap to 2 different layouts with the thumbsticks, which could help comfort-wise. And you also have those 2 additional thumbstick caps included as well. So with that, the X throws an undue jab after the bell and wins that round. As for the bumpers on the Eswap S, they feel incredibly cheap, chintzy, flimsy. They sound hollow and crappy, and they just don't feel great. I will say I do like how flat they are. Yeah, I'm good off those. Now over here on the older X, Thrustmaster was using a much more, well, what seems to be a secure mechanism, and not that you would ever press the bumpers over here with the tip of your finger, but you actually can, which is cool. But as the good Lord intended, you press the bumpers or shoulder buttons up here, these feel great, but they do still have a hollow, clacky, tinny sound. But the X slashes and gashes the S in the bumpers department. Now as for the triggers, they are almost identical in the plastics that they use, the little stippling or texture, and also this pretty much worthless, gutless trigger stop system, which only cuts out about 45% of the trigger pull. At that point, why really bother having them, other than having the additional feature on the box, that little marketing gimmick to spice it up and say, yep, I'm a pro controller. But there's the entirety of your trigger pull if you want to be able to modulate the throttle and brake in a racing game. Engage the trigger stops, which you can actually engage in-game without even looking on the controller, which I like. But it only cuts out about half of the trigger pull, if that. The same exact system on the S over here, only difference being cosmetically the coloration, and also the plastics feel just slightly cheaper on the S. I'm going to give the triggers to the X, but it's almost tied for being shitty. The Eswap S is a little scrapper. It was fighting for its life, but in the end, the X just twisted the niblets off. As for the rear buttons on the S and X, and yes, eventually I will remove those QC pass stickers. I wanted you to know that these pass quality control checks. Now, before I talk about what I don't like about the rear button suite on both of these controllers, which I think is a longer conversation, let me talk about what I do like, and that is the fact that you can rebind both of these controllers on the fly. You don't need the software program to rebind the rear buttons, which is pretty sweet. You do also have 2 swappable profiles on each, so that's cool if you share this with somebody else, or maybe 2 of your favorite games. You can have different profiles or button mappings. On the X, they definitely could have minimized the buttons down here. I don't know if they thought it looked more badass to have more buttons or what, but there are separate buttons for profile 1 and 2, which could have just been one button to switch between the 2 profiles, and actually all 3 of these buttons could have been integrated into one button, which is usually a profile switch / remapping mode button if you hold it down. To rebind or map one of the rear buttons, you actually don't need to hold down the mapping button, just press it once. I don't think you'll accidentally press it down here on the bottom, so that's not a big deal, but once you enter mapping mode, you are going to start by pressing one of the rear buttons 1 through 4. Then you figured it out because you're a smart stallion or stallionette. You're going to follow that up with a D-pad or face button that you would like bound or linked with that rear button. It doesn't stay in remapping mode. You do need to hit the mapping button each time to enter mapping mode, but it is pretty darn quick. And you will get a vibration in the controller to let you know, a little confirmation, yep, you rebound that rear button. Now on the S, this is going to be your profile swap button, so they did minimize from 3 to 2 buttons. Again, could have been just 1 button, not that I'm complaining, but if they wanted to clean up the front of their controller. The button that looks like a profile switch button definitely is that, and as for the mapping button, that is going to enter remapping mode. You are going to start with button 1 or 2 on the back, and then the concurrent face button or D-pad that you would like linked. It's pretty sweet. You have 2 onboard profiles, and you can remap or bind the buttons on the fly. I genuinely do like that. There's a bunch of things I don't like, and that is going to be the ergonomics or comfort of these buttons. It's not terrible on the S, as these buttons are substantially larger than on the old school X over here, its predecessor, but these are still smaller than I'd like. There's no grip or stippling on the plastic. It's not rubberized or anything. Also, they're not where your fingers naturally want to rest on the palm grips. You have to make a conscious effort to extend your hands out. This is very similar to the Razer Wolverine Ultimate line, but these aren't terrible. They're bordering terrible, but if you want to see terrible, I got it right here for you. After careful deliberation in my chambers, I know we're just jumping all over with themes. We started with gladiators throwing sand in each other's eyes in the Colosseum. Now careful deliberation, judge and jury here. And I'm glad you're present for this monumentous occasion, as the Thrustmaster Eswap X has now earned itself the title. It really has earned it for the worst rear button design on a pro controller. currently, from AK-40 Kevin in the game heaven. That is very fluid. That rating, that judgment of shittiness can be taken away at any time. But as of now, this is just a do-wackadoo, how do you do? Not fucking well if you're using this rear button system. It's stupid, much like the Razer Wolverine Ultimate, in which you have to cock your fingers out at an extended angle, which is actually more comfortable than it looks. Not after about 2 or 3 hours, you'll start to feel a little fatigue in your top fingers, unless you do the altered grip I showed you, where you just cover these bottom buttons and then slide up to the top as needed. Very common with the Razer community. That you shouldn't have to do that though. You should be able to cover all 4 of the buttons simultaneously, for God's sake. Preaching to the choir here. Now on this thing. On this rear button suite, the buttons are incredibly small. They're also placed dead center. In fact, also more dead center than the Razer Wolverine. And as you can see, they're very close together, not only vertically, but also horizontally. So you're in a very cramped up, not comfortable position. You can use this altered grip, which is substantially better. This is actually somewhat comfortable, where you cover the bottom 2 buttons and then slide up to the top 2 as needed. Also, the shapes of the buttons have this little swoop or concave, which you think would be good for ergonomics, kind of tucks your fingers in there, except it doesn't though. In practice, it really doesn't. It goes against, in theory, what it should do. In practice, it does not. It studied over the weekend, but it did not score well on the practical. It'll have to return for summer school. So rear buttons, since there's got to be a Victor, they're both slumming it on the same street corner together, but if I had to dust one off and take her home, it'd be the Eswap S. I'd rather have 2 somewhat comfortable and usable rear buttons than 4 not. Simple mathematics. You don't really have 4, you've got 0 as opposed to 2 on the S. The software suite. Is it sweet? The software program for both controllers is going to be Thrustmaster X. As for platforms supported, you can install this on your Xbox One, Series, Windows 10, and 11 PCs. So no Mac support, no any other consoles. Couldn't even see what I was looking at, but here's the listing on the Microsoft Store. No controller detected. I do detect that that's because it's not plugged in. So I'm going to start with the S and then we'll move to the X, but the customization, it's the same. It's the same software program. These controllers love when I shove a plug that ain't meant to go in that port, you know what I mean? Meaning I use a different brand or company's USB-C cable in the controller. You sick sicko. Right off the bat, I like the fact that I can full screen it. You know what else I like? The fact that I can control it with the controller as I'm doing right now, or with my keyboard. I will say though, you actually have to hold down the buttons. Like I'm holding down up, you have to hold it for a couple of seconds. If you just tap your keyboard, it won't recognize or register your input, which is kind of weird. But with the controller, which is my preferred method of browsing this application, it's very fluid, very responsive. Now you do have your 2 default profiles right here. You can also import from, I guess, other resources online, and you can also create your own presets and you can custom name them, which I appreciate. I'm over here using the controller. Let me just type it in with the keyboard like a normal person. Deluxe. Oh, ran out of characters. Now it's just Tomahawk Dell. Kablam. Blam. That works. Now, if you wanted to assign your new custom profile to profile 1 or 2, meaning you're going to be able to actually switch it, control it from the controller, because right now this thing Kablam Blam is useless to us. It's only on the computer application. It needs to get flashed to the controller. Come down here to the preset you want, click it, and now you can flash it or load it to profile 1 or 2, and you can also rename it. Now, the bumpers or shoulder buttons will scroll between the different submenus. Furthest to the left is the home menu, which shows you what profiles you have selected. Then your mapping, which again, you can remap the rear buttons on the fly, which I really appreciate. But if you want to remap any of the buttons, including face buttons, Dpad, whatever, you can do that here. Thrustmaster calls their thumbsticks mini sticks. I'm not sure why, because they're physically the same size. They're not like, it's not one of those ironic things like a guy in prison named Tiny, but really he's freaking huge. He's tossing people's salad at the buffet or whatever. He has a job in the cafeteria. I mean, they call them mini sticks, and I don't really understand that. But what I do understand is the fact that you have 3 bands or levels of adjustment. So if you're trying to fine tune things like your dead zones, your maximum response curve, stuff like that, you can make, well, custom response curves here, which is really sick. And you can also drag these as well, except I don't like that you can't drag them upwards or downwards, just back and forth. Now, if you start developing stick drift, you can bump up this value for center, and that will give you bigger dead zones, making your thumbsticks feel less responsive, but at least you won't be moving when you take your fingers off the thumbsticks. You can fight off stick drift for a little while longer before you have to buy one of those swappable modules. And this is separated for left and right stick, which damn well should be. Keep in mind any changes you have made will not be saved until you click save. Now with your triggers, this is in real time as I'm linearly squeezing these triggers with different amounts of force that is reflecting that. And you can also address the minimum and maximum required squeeze on those triggers. I like that. There's a lot of fine-tune adjustment. Same thing over here. You have control of all 4 of the vibration motors on board this controller. 2 in the palms, the rumble force motors, if you will, and those 2 precision vibration motors in the triggers. And this has a really interesting diagnostic or test system where you hold down the Y button and then squeeze one of the triggers, and it will test different strengths of the vibration motor depending on how hard you squeeze that trigger. I'll give you a little demo right now. That probably sounded weird over the microphone, but you know. Same thing for the palm grips. Hold down X and you'll get the same sensation. The palm vibration feels quite a bit weaker than a stock Xbox controller. It might just be a placebo effect, but it does feel weaker. The triggers feel balls to the wall strong as hell though. Now I do recommend doing the initial patch or update to get up to the latest firmware. Click on this little cog icon in the bottom. Well, you can't even see it because my head's in the way. But if I move over here, you sure as hell can. This little cog icon over here is going to show you the firmware that you're on, which is up to date because I just ran that initial update. Also, if you want a digital instruction manual, here's the link for that. PDF document, it is identical to the physical manual except you have color here. So I was very curious if you could use your own micro USB cable with this Eswap X. It has those plastic tracks and a large proprietary micro USB cable. Luckily, any micro USB cable you have lying around that is small enough to slide into this hole will work just fine. As you can see, the Eswap X is identically handled in the software. I just made a little preset over here called Jimmy 2 times.
I'm gonna go get the papers,
And it got that name because I'm gonna piece them up 2 times and send them back to the lobby, because I've got this controller in hand. As you can see, virtually no difference in the customization, but cosmetically it does make the change in the coloration of the triggers. It does reflect that you're using an Eswap X and not a S. So that's cool, since both models share the same software. It does show the different controllers. Initial update. Practice what you preach. Yes, sir. Oh, this is like a real driver pack here. This is like a real Windows installation. Okay. Like terms and service and everything. Yup. How big is the installation? That took a while. Here she goes. That made me nervous for a minute. I thought my controller was about to be bricked or something. It just didn't seem like it was working, but it did. I'm up to date now and things are good. I'm going to give the application or software suite a 10 out of 10 as it is virtually perfect. The only thing I would like to see is some support added for Mac for the very few gamers that are gaming on Mac. However, this is very, very good software because it is not mandatory. You can remap or rebind the rear buttons from the controller on the fly, so you don't even need this software, but installing it's very easy on PC and the Xbox One and Series. It looks identical on the Xbox consoles as what we just did here on PC. And I think the customization on every page was very in-depth, very good. You can counteract stick drift with dead zones. And just from a user interface standpoint, the fact that you can resize the window, you can full screen it, you can control the app with the controller or keyboard and mouse, you can type in the names of the profiles, not have to just like use the controller for that. This is a very good software suite. 10 out of 10 for me all day and every evening. The next section is going to be battery life, and it just doesn't matter because these controllers are wired. There's a couple of benefits to going wired, and that's certainly one of them. Consistency being one, not having to worry about battery life being the other, being able to choke out your buddy with the charging cable if he keeps missing his shots. And generally you'll get slightly faster speeds wired. When I say slightly, it's pretty negligible. In a previous video, I have gotten to 2 milliseconds of input lag or delay when overclocked via Bluetooth. And there's also mini controllers with 2.4 gigahertz dongles that are around that 2 millisecond of lag mark as well. So the difference between 1 and 2 milliseconds, wired and wireless, isn't really tangible to most gamers. So then the only real issue is keeping your wireless controllers charged, which can be a real bitch if you have controllers like the DualSense Edge. Now we're going to run X input test to get the stock input lag or delay. And as you can tell, we're seeing a lot of 3.8s, 3.9, so it's going to be 4 milliseconds on a 250 hertz stock clock. Now, if we don't see that here in the average, just scroll through the numbers manually and you will see one large outlier, which is going to throw off your average. But clear as day, a lot of 3.9s, 4 milliseconds of input lag or delay on a 250 hertz stock clock. Is this controller susceptible to being overclocked? In the Lord of Mice overclocking program, we are recognized as name, all caps, yelling at us over here, Eswap S Pro controller. Not overclocked, giving us around 4 milliseconds of input lag or delay. Let's overclock. Now it is overclocked at 1000 hertz polling rate, giving us an estimated 1 millisecond of input lag or delay. Let's test the theory. It sounds good in paper, but does it go down like that in the DM? And for real, we'll find out right now. I'm hopeful.
Oh, hello.
do, I do declare. Oh, Mr. Belvedere, look at that. I don't know what the fuck, that was weird. But anyway, that's a face of fascination there. Rarely do I get the pleasure of having success overclocking Xbox controllers. Now, I do still recommend overclocking Xbox controllers. If you're wondering why, check my overclocking guide. I walk you step by step, multiple platforms, how to overclock controllers. But I do mention during that video that you should still overclock Xbox controllers even though they're polling rate locked. But this is actually increasing the speed, so cutting the lag in half, or doubling the speed, if you will, from 4 to 2 milliseconds. Let's run another test. Yeah, you can tell the test finishes much quicker as well because the controller is feeding more inputs to the PC quicker. Now it's telling me I'm getting an average of 44 milliseconds. You can just fuck right off with that because I know it's incorrect. If I scroll through the numbers manually, do a little technical analysis, you're seeing the numbers, but the consensus, all these numbers are agreeing it's 2 milliseconds of input lag or delay on a 500 hertz clock. Now keep in mind, I did overclock to 1000, but the board is stopping it. I hit my mic here. The PCB, the printed circuit board on this controller, is actually limiting the maximum clock to 500 hertz. Even though I'm flashing it to 1000 with the Lord of Mice overclocking program, the controller's saying, take it easy, buddy, 500 is plenty, doubling the speed when wired to PC. Does the Eswap X do the same thing? I hope so. So we got the X in hand, which feels much heftier, definitely a heavier controller. You feel that for sure. We're back over here at 4 milliseconds as this is a non-overclocked controller, telling us 12 milliseconds average. We know that's incorrect. It's just that one big number right there. 4 milliseconds of input lag or delay, 250 hertz clock. Let's do something about it. Let's get funky with that chicken, you know? Program knows the name and it knows the game. Eswap X Pro controller, not overclocked. That will be changed now. And that is what we like to see. Yes. Same exact story here. We're getting about 2 milliseconds on average, but I'm going to run a couple more just to confirm that. Bam. Now, if you're getting more than 2 or 3 outliers, I would recommend rerunning the test because you're probably not going fast enough, slow enough, fluid enough, smooth enough on the old thumbsticks in the rotation, and you're getting some funky inputs. Not saying it's always operator error because sometimes X input test is acting like a bitch, but if you're getting more than like 3 or 4 outliers, I'd recommend just running another test. It's free to do. We just run back-to-back polls. Cool. See, that time I only had 1 outlier, meaning when I go to the top, it's just going to be 1 big number, not 2. The least amount of outliers, the better. 0 being the best, giving you the most accurate readings. It is an absolute tire draw as both of these controllers are identical. 4 millisecond stock clock, then they can be overclocked to 2 milliseconds of input lag or delay. And a quick note, if you're having any issues after the overclock with compatibility in any of your launchers, or the controller starts acting weird, maybe doing inputs that you're not pressing on the controller, then just taper it back to 500 hertz, considering the controller's limiting it at 500 hertz anyway. So pushing for 1000 hertz clock doesn't have any benefit because the controller's just stopping it at 500 anyway. And if it introduced any new issues, just taper back to 500. Should wrinkle out the kinks. So as opposed to doing a traditional cons and pros segment, I'm just going to skip over that and get right down to the verdict because the whole video is basically a cons and pros because I'm going back and forth with these two controllers. But overall, I think the cheaper, newer Eswap S is a better controller because it has an actual usable, somewhat comfortable, but still not great 2 rear button design as opposed to a janky, really crappy 4 rear button design. Trigger stops are identical. If you get stick drift, you can swap the modules on both. They share most of the core features except for crappy rear buttons to decent rear buttons. Same warranty system, same really good software program. I don't think the 2 additional thumbstick caps are a selling factor whatsoever. They're nothing to write home about unless you just really want to customize the hell out of an Eswap X and swap out these palm grips with a little color pop. And also something I forgot to mention earlier, which should have added a couple points or at least a half point to the triggers, is with that included Phillips head, you can remove these trigger covers, and with those color pop kits, they don't call them a color pop kit, but with those little customization kits that come with the side panels, they also come with trigger covers as well, which really lets you change up the look of your controller. That is a big selling factor of the X over the S. But if you don't care about the cosmetic looks or appearance and you're just about the performance, the Eswap S offers more price to performance or bang for buck for sure. Both of these bangers are linked in the description below. Drop in the comments section below what you're using to game on Xbox, and I'll see you Stallions and Stallionettes tomorrow. Peace. If you enjoyed the video, liking it helps it to get seen by more gamers. This information will reach and assist them as well, which in turn helps me grow this little channel, which I do greatly appreciate. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover news in the gaming community and industry, tutorials helping you get set up streaming and YouTubing, as well as honest gaming product reviews, keyboards, mice, headsets, controllers, mics, chairs, etc. There are some hefty exclusive discount codes found only in the description of my videos and only for the audience here at Gamer Heaven. I have links to all my other platforms and socials in the description below. To get in touch with myself and the
the Stallions and Stallionettes of Gamer Heaven, join the community Discord, and check me out at twitch.tv where I go live every other leap year on a blue moon if it falls into an odd calendar number, and my pH balance is on point. Just kidding. Starting June, I'm going to be live streaming a lot. Thanks for watching. This has been AK40 Kevin hosting Gamer Heaven, and I'll see you tomorrow because I upload daily. All the time. 60% of the time. Sometimes. Most of the time. Peace.